My parents adored my elder brother, and I didn't exist for them. So, I moved out of the family. 2 years later, my parents are at my door for shelter, but I remind them of past days. I, 24F, have always felt like an outsider in my own family. For as long as I can remember, my older brother Jake, 27M, has been the golden child. Our parents doted on him, celebrated his every achievement, and seemed to hang on to his every word. Meanwhile, I often felt invisible, my accomplishments going unseen, and my needs overlooked. My earliest memory of this dynamic dates back to when I was just 5 years old. It was Jake's 8th birthday, and our parents had thrown him an elaborate superhero-themed party. The entire backyard was decorated with streamers and balloons, and they'd even hired a magician for entertainment. I remember feeling excited, running around in my little Wonder Woman costume, eager to join in the fun. But as the party progressed, I realized that no one was really paying attention to me. When I tried to show off the cartwheel I'd learned in gymnastics class, my mom just patted my head absently and turned back to cooing over Jake opening his mountain of presents. I ended up sitting alone by the snack table, watching as Jake basked in the attention of our parents and all the party guests. This pattern continued as we grew older. Jake was always the center of attention. He was athletic, popular, and charming. Our parents never missed one of his football games, proudly cheering from the sidelines. They'd throw elaborate parties for his birthdays, inviting what felt like half the town. When Jake got his driver's license, they surprised him with a brand new car. I, on the other hand, was more introverted and academically inclined. I'd spend hours studying, pouring my heart into my schoolwork. But my straight A's were met with indifference. When I won the state spelling bee in 8th grade, my parents didn't even attend. They were too busy at one of Jake's football practices. I still remember standing on that stage, scanning the audience for familiar faces, only to realize that no one had come to support me. There was one person who always saw me, though: my grandmother. She lived a few hours away, so we didn't see her often, but she never failed to acknowledge my achievements. She'd send me handwritten letters of congratulations, always ending with, "I'm so proud of you, my little star." When she passed away during my sophomore year of high school, it felt like I'd lost my only ally. High school was a particularly tough time. Jake coasted by with mediocre grades, but was still treated like royalty at home. I maintained my 4.0 GPA, joined every academic club I could, and even started tutoring other students. But it felt like my efforts went completely unnoticed. I remember one particularly painful incident during my junior year. I had stayed up late for weeks working on a research project for the science fair. The night before the fair, I was putting the finishing touches on my presentation board in the living room. Jake came home late from a party, clearly drunk. He stumbled into my project, knocking it over and spilling beer all over my carefully prepared charts and graphs. I was devastated. Months of work, ruined in an instant. But when our parents came downstairs to see what the commotion was about, their reaction shocked me. Instead of reprimanding Jake, they fussed over him, worried that he might have hurt himself when he fell. My dad helped Jake to bed, while my mom started cleaning up the mess. When I burst into tears, frustrated and heartbroken, my mom just sighed and told me to stop being dramatic. I stayed up all night redoing my project. I managed to salvage enough to put together a decent presentation and ended up winning second place in the fair. But when I came home with my silver medal, my parents barely glanced up from the TV where they were watching one of Jake's old football games. When it came time to apply for colleges, Jake barely put any effort into his applications. He assumed he'd get a football scholarship somewhere. I, on the other hand, spent months perfecting my essays and applications. I was determined to get into a top university and prove my worth. I applied to a dozen schools, including my dream school, a prestigious university known for its excellent mathematics program. I'd been eyeing this school since I was 14, when I attended a summer math camp on their campus. The experience had been transformative. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who shared my passion for numbers and equations. I'd felt seen and understood in a way I never had before. Fast forward to last week. Both Jake and I were set to receive our final university acceptance letters and scholarship offers. The night before, our parents took Jake out to a fancy dinner to celebrate in advance. They didn't even ask if I wanted to join. I spent the evening alone in my room, trying not to let it get to me. The next morning, things only got worse. Mom made Jake's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes with whipped cream. And Dad kept telling him how proud they were, no matter what happened. No one even acknowledged me as I sat silently at the table, nibbling on a piece of toast. It was like I was completely invisible. When the mail finally arrived, we gathered in the living room to open our letters. I could hardly believe my eyes when I read mine. I'd not only been accepted to my dream school, but I'd also received a full academic scholarship and an invitation to join their honors program. My hands were shaking as I read and reread the letter. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping for at least a little recognition. But before I could even share my news, Jake ripped open his letter. His face fell as he read it. Turns out he'd barely been accepted to our local community college, and there was no mention of any scholarship. Our parents immediately rushed to console him, telling him it didn't matter and that he was still their superstar. I sat there in disbelief, clutching my acceptance letter. Neither of my parents even asked to see it. When I finally worked up the courage to tell them my news, my mom just nodded absently and my dad muttered a half-hearted, "That's nice, sweetie," before turning back to Jake. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Years of feeling ignored and unappreciated came crashing down on me. I realized that no matter what I achieved, I would never be good enough in their eyes. Jake would always be the golden child, even when he failed. Without saying a word, I went upstairs and started packing. I threw some clothes and essentials into a bag, along with the emergency cash I'd been saving from my tutoring jobs. I grabbed my important documents and my laptop. As I was about to leave, I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the framed photo of my grandmother on my nightstand. In a split-second decision, I grabbed it and carefully wrapped it in a sweater before placing it in my bag. I slipped out the back door while they were still fawning over Jake. I texted my best friend Sarah, asking if I could crash at her place for a few days. Then I blocked my parents and Jake's numbers. As I walked down the street, away from the only home I'd ever known, a mix of emotions washed over me. There was fear and uncertainty about what the future held. But there was also a sense of liberation, like I was finally breaking free from invisible chains that had held me back for so long. It's been 3 days now, and I'm still at Sarah's. Her parents have been incredibly understanding and supportive. They've even offered to let me stay until I leave for university in the fall. I've applied for on-campus housing at my university, and I'm looking into part-time jobs to support myself. Yesterday, I finally worked up the courage to check my email. There were dozens of messages from my parents, ranging from angry demands that I come home immediately to tearful pleas asking what they'd done wrong. Reading them, I felt a twinge of guilt. But then I remembered all the years of feeling invisible, of having my accomplishments overlooked, of never being good enough. And I knew I couldn't go back. I know the road ahead won't be easy. I'll have to figure out how to support myself, how to navigate college life without the safety net of family. But for the first time in my life, I feel free. Free from the constant comparisons, the disappointment, the feeling of never being good enough. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I'm done being invisible. I'm done trying to earn the love and approval of people who will never truly see me. It's time for me to focus on building a life where I'm valued for who I am, not constantly overshadowed by someone else. Am I wrong for leaving? Should I have tried harder to make them see me? Part of me feels guilty, but a bigger part feels like this was long overdue. I'd appreciate any advice or perspectives from others who might have been in similar situations. Update 1. It's been 6 months since I walked out of my parents' house, and I can hardly believe how much my life has changed. I'm now settled into my dorm at university, and I've just finished my first semester. The academic challenge has been intense, but I'm thriving. I've maintained a 4.0 GPA and even received special recognition from the dean for my performance in my advanced mathematics course. The transition wasn't easy at first. I remember my first night in the dorm after my roommate Lily and I had finished unpacking. As I lay in my narrow twin bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the dormitory, I was hit with a wave of homesickness so strong it took my breath away. For a moment, I considered calling my parents, begging them to come get me. But then I remembered why I left, and I forced myself to push through the loneliness. Gradually, things got easier. Lily and I bonded over our shared love of classic literature and obscure documentaries. We'd stay up late into the night, dissecting the themes of Dostoevsky novels or debating the merits of different documentary filmmakers. She quickly became not just a roommate, but a true friend. I also found a wonderful support system in my study group. We meet 3 times a week in the library, pushing each other to excel and offering encouragement when things get tough. There's Alice, a brilliant physics major with a wicked sense of humor. Tom, a pre-med student who stress bakes cookies for us during finals week. And Maria, an art history major who helps us maintain perspective when we get too caught up in our equations. It's a stark contrast to the loneliness I felt while studying at home, where my efforts were always overlooked. Here, my achievements are celebrated, my struggles are supported, and my passion for learning is shared and encouraged. To help cover my living expenses, I applied for a position as a teaching assistant in the mathematics department. I was nervous about the interview, worried that my lack of family support might somehow be held against me. But to my surprise and relief, the professor interviewing me was impressed by my independence and drive. The job has been an incredibly rewarding experience. Not only am I earning money, but I'm also gaining valuable experience and building relationships with the professors. Dr. Harrison, the head of the department, has become something of a mentor to me. She reminds me a bit of my grandmother. She has the same knack for seeing potential in people and nurturing it. One of these relationships has become particularly special. Mark, another teaching assistant, has become a constant source of support and encouragement. We started off as colleagues, spending long hours grading papers and preparing lesson plans together, but over time, our connection deepened. I remember the first time I realized my feelings for Mark were more than just friendly. We were in the TA office late one night, racing to finish grading a stack of calculus exams before the deadline. I was feeling overwhelmed and discouraged, doubting my abilities as a TA. Mark noticed my mood, and without a word, went out and came back with my favorite coffee and a chocolate muffin. It was such a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. In that moment, I saw him in a whole new light. Mark is everything I never knew I needed in a partner. He's kind, intelligent, and most importantly, he sees me. He notices when I'm having a bad day and always knows how to cheer me up. He celebrates my successes as if they were his own. For the first time in my life, I feel truly valued and appreciated. Last week, Mark surprised me with a picnic in the campus botanical gardens. As we sat among the blooming flowers, he took my hand and told me he loved me. He promised to always be there for me, to support my dreams and ambitions. I was overwhelmed with emotion. I never thought I could feel so loved and cherished. As for my family, I've had minimal contact with them. My mother has called a few times, leaving voicemails that oscillate between guilt-tripping and anger. My father sent a terse email asking when I was going to stop this nonsense and come home. I haven't responded to either of them. Jake, predictably, hasn't reached out at all. At first, their messages would send me into a spiral of guilt and self-doubt. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But with time, and with the support of my new friends and Mark, I've grown stronger. I've realized that I don't owe them my time or energy. I'm not responsible for their feelings or their inability to recognize my worth. I won't lie and say it's been easy. There are still days when I miss the idea of a loving, supportive family. Holidays are particularly tough. I spent Thanksgiving with Lily's family, and while they were incredibly welcoming, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Christmas was even harder. I stayed on campus, one of the few students who didn't go home for the break. But then I look at the life I'm building for myself, the genuine connections I'm forming, and I know I made the right choice. Looking ahead, I'm excited about what the future holds. I'm considering applying for a prestigious summer research program. The application process is intense, but Dr. Harrison thinks I have a good shot at it. Mark has been incredibly supportive, spending hours helping me refine my application. We've also started tentatively talking about our future together. It's both thrilling and a little scary to imagine a life where I'm truly loved and supported. I know there will be challenges ahead. I'm still learning to navigate this new, independent life. Finances are tight, and I'm constantly juggling my studies, my TA responsibilities, and my relationship. But for the first time, I'm facing the future with hope and confidence rather than fear and insecurity. I'm no longer the invisible girl, desperately seeking approval. I'm becoming the woman I was always meant to be, surrounded by people who truly see and value me. Update 2. It's hard to believe that 2 years have passed since I left my family home. So much has changed, and yet in many ways, I feel more like myself than ever before. I graduated from university last month, summa cum laude. As I stood on that stage accepting my diploma, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment. My professors, friends, and of course, Mark, were all there cheering me on. It was a moment of pure joy and validation. I couldn't help but think of my grandmother. How proud she would have been to see me in my cap and gown, achieving the dreams she always encouraged me to pursue. The journey to this point wasn't always smooth. There were nights when I doubted myself, wondered if I was cut out for the rigorous academic program. I remember one particularly challenging semester when I was taking an advanced topology course. The concepts were so abstract, so difficult to grasp, that I seriously considered dropping the class. But Mark and my study group rallied around me. We had marathon study sessions, fueled by coffee and determination. When I finally mastered the material and aced the final exam, it felt like a victory for all of us. Speaking of Mark, our relationship has only grown stronger over the past 2 years. We've weathered the stresses of final exams, the joys of academic achievements, and the everyday challenges of building a life together. He proposed to me on our graduation day, right after the ceremony. It was a simple, heartfelt proposal, just the two of us in our favorite spot in the botanical gardens, the same place where he first told me he loved me. We got married in a small, intimate ceremony last week. Our friends from university and my support system from the past 2 years were all there to celebrate with us. The wedding was beautiful, but it also brought up some complicated emotions. As I got ready that morning, I couldn't help but think about my mother. In another life, she might have been there, helping me with my dress, sharing in my excitement. But then I looked around at the women who were there. Lily adjusting my veil, Alice cracking jokes to calm my nerves, Dr. Harrison, who had become like a second mother to me, giving me a tearful hug before the ceremony. And I realized that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you, who support you unconditionally. Career-wise, things are looking bright. I've accepted a position as a high school mathematics teacher starting this fall. It's in a different city, about 3 hours away from where we went to university. I'm excited about the opportunity to inspire young minds, to maybe be for my students what my grandmother was for me. A source of encouragement and validation. Mark has found a job at a local engineering firm in the same city. We're both excited about this new chapter in our lives. We were actually in the middle of packing for our honeymoon when everything changed. We had our suitcases open on the bed, debating whether we really needed that extra pair of shoes, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was a bit puzzled as I went to answer it. Nothing could have prepared me for who I saw standing there: my parents. They looked older, more worn down than I remembered. My mother's eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying. My father couldn't quite meet my gaze. For a moment, we all just stood there in awkward silence. Finally, my mother spoke. "Can we come in?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I hesitated for a moment before nodding and stepping aside to let them enter. As we sat in the living room, the story came tumbling out. It turns out that Jake, my golden child brother, had fallen in love with a woman they described as manipulative and greedy. Against their wishes, he had married her 6 months ago. Things had quickly gone downhill from there. Jake, influenced by his new wife, had become increasingly distant and hostile towards our parents. He'd started demanding money, making veiled threats about cutting them off if they didn't comply. The final blow came last week. Jake had somehow convinced our father to sign over the deed to the family home. Once the property was in his name, Jake and his wife hurriedly kicked our parents out. They were now essentially homeless, with only a suitcase of belongings to their name. As I listened to their story, a whirlwind of emotions swept through me. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. The golden child had finally shown his true colors. Another part felt pity for my parents, seeing them so broken and vulnerable. But mostly I felt angry. Angry that they had the audacity to show up on my doorstep after years of neglect and indifference. Angry that they only sought me out when they needed something. And angry at myself for still caring, despite everything. When they finished their story, my mother reached out to take my hand. I instinctively pulled away. "We're so sorry," she said, tears in her eyes. "We've realized how wrong we were, how unfairly we treated you. We were hoping we could stay with you for a while, just until we get back on our feet." I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in years. I saw the desperation in their eyes, the hope that I would be their saving grace. And in that moment, I made my decision. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You can't stay here." The shock on their faces was palpable. They clearly hadn't expected this response. My father started to protest, but I held up my hand to stop him. "For years," I continued, "I tried to earn your love and approval. I worked hard. I achieved things I was proud of, but none of it was ever enough. You consistently chose Jake over me, made me feel invisible in my own home. And now, when Jake has turned his back on you, you come to me expecting what? That I'll welcome you with open arms? That I'll put my life on hold to take care of you?" My mother was openly crying now. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in the span of our conversation. But I pressed on, years of pent-up feelings finally finding their voice. I've spent the last 2 years building a life for myself, a life where I'm valued and loved for who I am. I won't jeopardize that. I won't go back to feeling like I'm not enough. I took a deep breath before delivering my final words. "I'm sorry for what Jake has done to you. I truly am, but I can't be the solution to your problems. You made your choice years ago when you decided Jake was the only child worth your attention and love. Now you have to live with the consequences of that choice." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. As I showed them to the door, my father finally spoke. "We really are sorry," he said softly. "We know we messed up. Is there any chance at all that we could try to make things right?" I looked at him, then at my mother. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine a world where we could move past all the hurt and build a real relationship. But then I remembered all the years of feeling invisible, of having my accomplishments ignored, of never being good enough. And I knew that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. "I think it's too late for that," I said quietly. "I wish you the best, but I can't be part of your lives anymore. Please don't come here again." With that, I closed the door. I leaned against it for a moment, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. Mark came and wrapped his arms around me, offering silent support and comfort. As we returned to our packing, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness, relief, and a sense of closure. I knew I had made the right decision for myself, even if it wasn't an easy one. Tomorrow, Mark and I will leave for our honeymoon. We'll explore new places, make new memories, and continue building our life together. And while a small part of me will always mourn the family relationship I never had, I'm choosing to focus on the family I'm creating for myself. One built on mutual respect, support, and unconditional love. As I zipped up my suitcase, I caught sight of the framed photo of my grandmother on the dresser. Her kind eyes seemed to sparkle, and I could almost hear her voice saying, "I'm proud of you, my little star." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed those words.